Let's warm up first and talk about what we do in our own businesses from a time point of view. I think that would be good to just get an insight from you first, Sam. Like, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? How are you spending your time in your business?
When I was heavy in the early stages of figuring out how to be an engineer and studying lean and Sigma and process and all this kind of stuff, I was like, right, okay, well, there's 24 hours in a day and there's 7 days in a week. So that's 168 hours in a week. Is that about right? And roughly I can break that up into 15-minute chunks. And I literally plotted out my entire week, but into 15-minute chunks. And I was like, well, I need to work out and I need to eat. And that was fine when I was single. And then I met my girlfriend, now wife, and let's keep it PG. We were lying in bed one morning, and at this point, I'd graduated to a consultant, but I was still being paid for time, for hours, hour chunks of time. I'm typically an early riser, get in the office. She wanted to stay in bed a bit longer, and I wanted to get up and get at it. And then a while later, I said, she's like, why are you looking at your watch? I was like, that just cost however many £100. And she went, get that out.
So you're married now. Okay.
We're married now, yeah. And at that point, I started to, I guess, realize like my priorities are all wrong. But if you are optimizing just for time and money, you do miss out on this other like big picture. So the big thing, like, I would love to say, I grew as a person, I became more emotionally aware and started to appreciate the finer things in life. What actually happened was I got like hit in the face when we had our son and was like, you're not in control of your time, whether you want to be or not. And it completely shifted my mindset. And I'll be honest, it's a lot of why I'm with my wife is she's a researcher and essentially has always had complete autonomy over her time. And her life has been results-based. She has to do studies and publish and see patients and do clinical trials. And like, she just is in control of these massive projects. And it's quite a unique setup. And I saw this when I met her. She had these priorities like, yeah, work's a thing that happens and it's a result of doing some activities. But she has this, like, she's, emotionally stable, and she's had a lovely upbringing and all the rest of it. So she had this quality of like, no, work's just a thing that happens and it's not the thing, which is not where my head was at. And then we had our son, and I was fortunate enough that I was working from home for a year. I was working on another startup for driverless cars, and I thought this is going to be great because he's a baby and he'll sleep all the time, and I've not got to commute to an office and I'm not working with other people, and it's just like me and 3 others and we're communicating on Slack. I'm going to have like 18 hours a day to get this startup off the ground. And that just didn't happen, never happened. So this is the backstory. Like there is a way of thinking about it, which is cram something into every 15-minute slot and make sure that 15-minute slot is the most optimal important thing, and figure out when your energy is really high, and that's when you're going to do the really intense tasks, and make sure that there's no meetings, and there's all these things you can do. And I don't think that is an approach that works if you are, and it's to be very clear, like if you're stacking shelves or doing a repetitive task over and over, you're employing someone to do those very specific things that require no creativity, no higher order thinking and all that kind of stuff. And that's not to be derogatory to those repetitive tasks, but that they really lend themselves, like manufacturing process really lends itself to that time blocking, sort of very systematic process led thing. But the sort of work we do, like we said, in consultant world, it's not that we can move someone necessarily cheaper or whatever else. It's that we can read the map and make decisions, and there's a level of creativity, and it's not just a cookie cutter process. It quite often requires thought and design, and essentially you're always taking these requests and designs, so you need the space. So where I am now, where life is reality now, I prioritize family first. Like that is the number one thing. I want to get up and have breakfast with my son. I want to have as many dinners as possible. And I do work later now. And then I want to protect holiday time and everything else. And where that has led me to is that I have a whole backlog of tasks which are critical tasks, and they're defined by the project. Basically, I end up with 2 buckets of tasks: reoccurring tasks that reoccur on a frequency, whether that's every day, every week, every month, every quarter, and they're all checklist and they're planned into my diary. And then those ad hoc tasks, as I think of them, the ones where it's like, okay, someone's come at me and they want to build a customer support system for some SaaS solution, or they want some new bit of software and I've got to design it, or I've got to build a team or recruit someone, or well, figure a problem out. Those get lumped in the mornings. And so I typically have my day broken down into 5 or 6 big buckets of time, usually around about an hour. And I have the deep work, as I think of it, early mornings. And that can be before my wife and my son get up in the morning. But honestly, like, that's an optional, that's an extra, because again, like young children, they wake up in the night, they do their own thing, people get sick, relatives die, like life happens. There's then the time which I know is protected. My wife's got stuff on, my son's at school or with grandparents or wherever. And so I know that I've got that protected time, 9 till 12. Very critically, like, I have a checklist, which is to remove distractions. And what that means is WhatsApp's off, Facebook Messenger's off, emails not opened. And I program that up to a Stream Deck, which closes down all my applications, opens up a few critical applications, and get into that. And then the afternoon is these time block things. And then in amongst that, I have some stretching, some walks, and some other things. And honestly, like, I'm working on that, because it's great to say, like, I'm going to be fit and have abs and whatever else. But my son doesn't sleep, and I like food, and I've got low willpower at that time of day. And guess what? I have a cup of coffee and crack on with work during that time. But working on it. So that's, the honest answer.
That's really interesting, actually. You're more organized than I might have assumed you were, having a kid. Honestly, I don't know if that's because you're a guy or not. I don't know if there's a difference there at all. But my routine at the moment is I normally get up at 5:30, 6, and I go and do focus work. So before my kids wake up. Yeah. And I've been doing that.
You're a good person.
Well, I tell you why, right? So I've been working at home since 2018. So I kind of quit my corporate job, came home, started out at home, and I for a good couple of years, like, either oldest child was at nursery or littlest was a baby and slept quite a lot, and I just got left alone to get on with work. It was lovely. And then the pandemic hit. My husband, who works in events, lost every single job. We watched every single job cancel in a week. So he was at home. My eldest daughter was meant to be at school. She was at home. And then the littlest is much older. She's a toddler at this stage, slightly older toddler, so really demanding. And I looked around my very quiet house and there were like 4 people in, 3 who are very, very noisy. So it was at this point I was really trying to grow my membership business, but it's content heavy. So every time I started to write something down, someone would burst into my office and be like, can I just, where do we keep could we just, and then plus as well, there's a lot of emotional support that as the mother of the household, I had to give to someone who's lost all their work, and to the kids and everything's going to be all right. So the only time I could find for that focus was really early in the morning. So someone had recommended it to me, Janet Murray, actually. She does like the Courageous Content podcast. I poo-pooed it. I was like, no way am I getting up at like 5:30 in the morning. So honestly, you could get so much done. So she actually put on these co-working sessions that you could join at 6 in the morning, and she would just sit and on a Zoom call getting on with work, and then invited people who were in her membership, which I was at the time, to come on with her. She trialed this using, like, FocusMate is one of those sites where you join with someone else randomly.
Online group working.
Yeah, but the idea is if you turn the camera on, you turn the mic on, and you commit to each other what you're going to do in a time slot. So normally it's like typically an hour. And she'd gone off and trialed this and then brought it back to us. And it's like, well, there's nothing to lose. And it's just amazing how much you can get done when you all come together, say, right, in this session, I'm going to work on this. And the camera's on, so you can't just go and have a quick wee or a drink or faff around on Facebook or whatever, right? And so I really got into that, and I did that for the rest of that year. So from like March, April, all the way to December. And then, the nights kind of came in and it was a little bit harder to get to get up, but the habit never went away. So, I'm normally at my desk in between like 6 and half 6, not as early as 5 anymore.
What role do you think that committing to other people played? I mean, if you had to say there were two things going on there. One was like you've got a desire, you're motivated towards like this outcome you want, which is to get your work done, versus this away from pain, like I'm going to let someone down that I've kind of made this commitment to that I'm going to turn up. What proportion of those do you think made you do it? What ratio do you think they were in?
Oh, like 100%. Yeah, 100% the latter, because as a recovering people pleaser, I'm like, I'm here, I'm doing this thing, I want to make it really work for you, and I'd even run the sessions for her if she couldn't make it as well, or I might have run one or two, I think, and wanted to be seen as someone who would get their work done, and I used it as content. I went off and spoke about it, so that definitely helped that side of my personality, and it's just not gone away now. So what I found was really good about that time, especially with kids, is that as soon as the kids woke me up, my brain's disheveled. I don't know what I'm doing. They're demanding things, and I haven't got a chance to get my thoughts into focus first. And if it's one thing I've just learned from years and years of running projects, is that if you can sit down and plan the thing that you're going to work on, then there's no chaos. Then okay, well, this is the thing I have to do today. Just to your point, you know what your priorities are for the day, and then I find like having that focus time in the morning will set me up for the rest of the day. But I must confess, right, I support this with lots of other things. So I've got working time. Once I have to go.
Caffeine.
Well, caffeine, I'm totally 100% addicted. Like I just nectar cold brew, right? I drink nonstop caffeine throughout the day. But then I stopped drinking. So I'm teetotal now, and I don't drink. So I don't deal with any hangovers or anything like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In order to improve my focus. Yeah. I always stop by about 7:30, go and do the kids thing, take them to school. And then by the time I'm back at my desk, it's like 9:30. Then I've got this list of things to do that I've planned in that focus time. Right.
And a second wave of energy as well, I guess. Second wave of focus and
yeah. And then I've probably got until about 2:30, 3, and then I go and do the school run. And then after the school run, it's just I'd like to say I could do focus time, but then because the kids are slightly older now, they let me like sit in my office and work. They don't want me sat with them while they're watching YouTube or whatever, right? So I can't. I could probably have phone calls during that time and chat to people and get on DMs and update stuff and things like that. But in terms of like deep thought about the creative process, deep thought about strategy, deep thought about copywriting, all of those things have to be done when I'm on my own. And I either listen to very loud, intense music, or and I have a specific playlist for that. Or I have a YouTube channel that I go to. It's called Merv, and she's a student based at Glasgow University, and she does co-working on YouTube, like live. And it's just the noise of someone sat there doing studying, and there's live chat with everyone joining. So it's like that Janet Murray approach that I was talking about before with her co-working, but it's all done on YouTube. And it's very calming. She must add like extra ambience onto her videos because you can hear like rain gently in the background or children playing. And it's that calmness that really helps as well. And you'll stop after 50 minutes of working and have a break, and then she'll come back again and again. So, I could sit and do hours and hours just listening to that YouTube channel.
I think that there's something in this with regards to internal and external motivators. So I see people that are uber successful. They're kind of psychopathic a little bit. Like they don't. There's an element. They've got an edge where they're like, well, I'm competitive. I'm going to win. Kind of. Maybe that's like the hard edge, but like they're ultra motivated to do the thing because they want to be the best. And whether someone's like cheering them on or making it cozy for them to do, they're going to do it. And my wife, who's dead kind and gentle, I would put in that bucket. And I'm also thinking about like other people that are entrepreneurs and that are leaders, like they're in that. I mean, who's the guy? Jacko Willink. Have you seen him? He's like ex-American Special Forces. I see his feed every day. Like he takes a picture of his watch and it's like 4:30, and I'm at it again, 4:30. I'm thinking
this is like Mark Wahlberg, wasn't it? He brought that routine out, his daily routine where he gets up at like 3:30 and does 2 hours in the gym, which I didn't believe for a second.
I look at those guys and girls and I think, awesome. But then like quite openly say I'm a bit soft, and I'm a people pleaser as well. I get that, and I think there's something around that community. And because what's the thing about if a vet says to you your cat's really ill and they need to take these 3 pieces of medicine and they've got to be spaced 3 hours and 46 minutes apart, and they've also got to have these injections but they can't be had on the same day, like you make sure you give them that medication. But if the doctor's like, just eat a bit better.
That's really interesting you say that, because I forgot one of the motivating factors for getting up really early during the pandemic was I had a cat with diabetes
Okay.
who had to have medicine at a set time. So that was like, oh, I just get up and do the cat, right? So
I totally get that, because the point I'm making, and it's the point that I feel as well, is we will do so much more for others than we will do for ourselves, even though we know these things are good for us. And I think this is one of the challenges of being a business owner. Like, you see really smart, intelligent, capable people who, when they're out on their own, are just so much less, I want to say, aggressive. Like, whereas you see them in the sort of the group scenario, in the corporate structure, and they're like, they've got a bit about them. They're like, yeah, okay, well, I can be better and more assertive because there's someone to compare themselves to. And from my perspective, I put myself in that bucket. Like, I love being amongst it and in a team. Like, that's just my vibe. I think probably there's what's the personality type integrator. That's where I love it. And when COVID happened, I was in an office at the bottom of the garden to get some separation because I couldn't do it in the house. Like, I couldn't deal with the distraction. I needed the focus. But then I was on my own. It was so isolating. And since all of that, to avoid my wife and I killing one another, and also to give us a bit of space, like, I now have an office. Occasionally I have my team in here, but it really just doesn't make sense to do that. Like, it's better for everyone to be remote, because why waste the time traveling? But the 15, 20 minutes to my office, absolutely worth it. But I have considered many, many, many times hiring a virtual assistant for whatever they cost you to just sit with me on the PC all day, just going, here's a task list, Sam. You've set the task list. Just go do it. And I feel like it'll be so much more likely to get more done.
I hear this, right? Because coming from a time where, you had your computer and email pre-social media, right, in the office, which I remember very well. We kind of lived in the inbox a little bit as a group, but still it felt, connected and social, and we go out to the pub and everything. And then Yammer came along. Do you remember Yammer?
Yeah.
It got purchased by Microsoft, so it lost all its cool, but it was around the sort of,
Yeah. So they killed it.
yeah, around the 2010s, and it was like a social network for workspaces before Facebook had their version, which never really took off, right? And so we moved things to Yammer, and it felt cool and interesting, and everything. And then Slack came along. As an agency, we fell in love with Slack, set it all up, totally lived in it. And after a while, what happened was, as people weren't in the office as much, remote working became more of a thing, especially because we had so many employees around the world. And it became more cost effective in the business to allow people to stay at home so we could get more time out of them. And because Slack meant that people, could just communicate really quickly. However, the thing I found about Slack is people want to live in there because they feel like if they're continually connected, it's a way of feeling productive, right? And coming from a background where, digital marketing agency where we specialize in building websites and software, working at a massive software company, almost unicorn one as well. Like, from that level to that level, everyone lives in Slack. Everyone feels compelled to continue connecting in there to seem like they're being productive at the detriment of doing the focus work. Devs really struggle with Slack, right? Devs are told, keep in touch, but also do your work.
Yeah. Do this really difficult thing that requires you to focus for like 6 hours non-stop. Oh, and by the way, can we have an update at a twice daily stand-up?
Why have you got back to my Slack? Yeah, I slacked you 10 minutes ago, and the idea always was with Slack was to remove the bulkiness of email, right? But instead what it did was demand attention on an ongoing basis.
Kind of like low-level stressor all the time. Like, hey, is that thing done yet? Knock, knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. You done? You done?
And that's the downside, I think, of that group environment, is that it's like the metaphorical tap on the shoulder. Oh, can I just? And I love I'm not sure who's done the illustration of it, but I saw a cartoon where it really encapsulated what it's like for a developer to be interrupted when they're thinking about something, because it takes 20 minutes to get into a thought process once you've been interrupted, sometimes a bit longer, right? And so they're really thinking about a problem, they're connecting the dots, conceptually moving through something, and then someone taps on the shoulder, can I just ask you? And it just poofs above their head, right? And that's I think the downside of that group environment.
100%. So let's wrap up slagging off everyone that does it wrong with maybe a couple more examples and then go to what it should look like. So I think another problem is the meeting culture. Now everyone's remote. So you've got all of these big FTSE companies. And let's say the fundamental problem here is we're measuring time. I think therein lies the problem. We're measuring the amount of time that people are spending to achieve an outcome. It's the wrong measurement. It's an easy measurement, it's a lazy measurement, but that's ultimately what gets measured. And what gets measured gets managed, and it's the wrong thing to optimize for. And I want to absolutely slate all the companies and all of the huge institutions by measuring this time. And I think, well, we'll get into that. But
they don't just measure time, though, do they? They measure time in hour increments. So if everything takes an hour, great. If it doesn't take an hour, you're wasting time there, right?
yeah, and if some PM pipes up and says, "Oh, well, we do earn value where we measure time against progress on the project," you're still measuring time because your project plan, you're just measuring time against time, which is wrong again. So, like, I've friends who are still in the corporate world, and they say it's just gone bonkers because you have senior directors in these big companies that are so far removed from the value-added activities that they're going, "Oh, how do we know anyone's working?" And they say it's just meetings. They're literally spending 8 hours a day in meetings, and they're going, "Well, I'm really busy." I go, "Well, no, you're sat in meetings." And Phil Graham does an awesome job in his blog post, "Makers versus Managers Schedule." I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but I still think fundamentally it's wrong. So essentially, what Phil Graham says is there's two sort of types. Oh, I'm going to paraphrase it and get it all wrong, but he says there's two types of people. You have the dev types, the creative types, and for their 8 hours, they want to maintain that focus. And it's sort of the principles from the one thing, like you were saying, where you have this cost of switching tasks, this cost of switching focus, this cost of talking about it and motivation. There's a lot of intangible costs to not maintaining focus to solve a problem. And then you have a manager who's concerned about making lots of decisions based on data. And so they want to get data, make a decision, get data, make a decision. And they deal in like hour increments because that's how calendars are set up. It's the same reason that everything is square in our lives. It's because we have square paper and pencils and rulers.
It's just a setting in a calendar, guys. You can make your meetings 25 minutes. They don't have to be an hour.
Exactly. And I'm right there with you. I guess we're saying that this is the thing that's wrong. So what do we think would be right? Have you heard of Duolingo?
Sure.
Yeah, unicorn, like
Yeah.
So let's just explain.
I've never used it. I'm not great at finishing courses in languages. I'm known for that.
It's an app. It started off for free. They're now unicorn status. Essentially, it's always free. You learn a language on there. Yeah, I think they have users that have streaks of like 7 years, and they have leaderboards and all the rest of it. And in my opinion, those guys have absolutely crushed it. Now, I'm going to summarize hearsay. So, take all this with not a pinch of salt, like a bucket of salt. But essentially, when they started off as a startup, they started off how every startup should start, which is not quite a dictatorship, maybe a monarchy. And essentially, the founder makes all the calls. But then now they're at however many hundred, couple of thousand employees. They have seen what goes wrong when you measure time in a company. What happens when you measure time is people go and spend time, which isn't the result you're looking for. You're looking for productivity. That's a different thing. You're looking for outcomes. So what they did instead was assign people areas of responsibility, metrics, outcomes to be responsible for. So there was a really great example I came across today where it was a D2C company doing drop shipping, and they found that their 3PL, the logistics store that deals with their handling, had overcharged them £750,000 over the last 12 months. And I dug into this with them, was like, well, how has that happened? And essentially it's because you have someone in accounting who's responsible for money, and then you have someone in operations who's responsible for tracking if all the inventories come in. And this overcharge kind of falls in the middle. Like neither one of them are actually really responsible for it. Whereas the way Duolingo approaches their operations is to put someone in as responsible for an outcome, for a measurable thing. So they have a team that is in charge of average user time on the app. And that's their whole job, like just increase the user average time. And that suddenly means that, well, I'm not just dealing with this one feature, this one button, or this leaderboard page, or these, this group of features with number of languages and these pings. It's like, no, we can touch all of that. And you're measuring that outcome. You're not measuring, okay, I've got a team of 4 people and I'm paying them for 40 hours a week. So are they each spending 140, 160 hours a month, less holidays on this? Like that's just a measure of how much you're spending. And it difference between lagging and leading measures.
Yeah. So what you're saying here is what we focus on in agile project management, basically, which is it's all about
Velocity.
Yeah, it's all about the tasks that you need to complete and how quickly you can complete them. It's just really frustrating, though, in the agency world, in the service world in particular, that in order to sell something, it's been easier / lazier to sell it in time boxes, right? So, okay, we estimate this is going to take this much. So we charge this much per day or per hour. So this is the ballpark of how much a project's going to cost. And when you pitch the alternative, which is, hey, we're going to work on this for 2 weeks. This is how much it's going to cost. We'll see what we can get done in that time. There's more risk there if you've never completed that particular like product or app or feature or whatever before, right? So I see like why that is still the case in kind of many businesses, because it is easier to sell time rather than sell like the tasks.
It's easier in the short term.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so that's how salespeople work, right? It's short-term gains. Yeah, of course we can sell that. And many times I'd get delivered a project from a salesperson going, "Well, we've sold this now. This is what you you have to go and do." But having a project, an outcome in a business where it is focused on just on tasks is very powerful, because you get very good at prioritizing what's important and what isn't. And quite often when you are looking at a task list in your business, there are things that are going to be on there that are political, or they're a vanity metric, or they're the things you feel you should do, right? But actually, if you was to look at that task list with laser focus and think, what is going to give me the outcome here? The whole way you view that project changes. And this is in agile. If we're working in 2-week sprint, for example, and we've got an outcome, right, we want to ship this feature on this date so we can see if users actually want to use it or not, and we've only got 2 weeks to do this. It's amazing the ingenuity, the resourcefulness that devs will give you in trying to meet that goal and to kind of ship on that date. And then you can decide whether that feature or whatever is going to work with those users, and then kind of bring it back into like a later sprint. But again, in the past, clients have been very focused on task. Yes, that's all very well, but what are we going to do about the logo size? Right? Or how will we know if, okay, you've shipped that particular feature, but how will we know if it's quality or not? I mean, it's been a frustrating thing to have to deal with in an agency setting, I think, in the past, is being able to change the mindset of people to focus on task outcomes.
The whole process really just grinds my gears. Let's start to finish. Okay, so if anyone wants to go online and get some visuals and look at the literature around this, there's now a retired military standard called MIL Standard 498. It's a standard for developing systems. And essentially, whether you're working agile or not, all projects, engineering projects, software projects, a physical goods project, they all go through the same life cycle. And you might dwell, you might spend different amounts of focus on each stage, but essentially you begin with some requirements. Like I want to put a man on the moon, or a person on the moon, as it should have been. I want to, deliver clocks. I want to make batteries. I want to sell widgets, whatever it is. Like, you have that front end requirement. It might be, I want a platform that can go supersonic and drop weapons somewhere else. And you might want a few more requirements than just like, I want something that flies and goes really fast. You might have a few requirements, let's say a few thousand requirements. But the point is, you start with a requirement. And at that point, early concept stage, someone goes, well, how much would that cost? So then, back of a fact packet, you get your smartest people, might be you as a founder, to go, well, if I'm a carpenter and they want a chair, well, usually chairs have 4 legs and a back, and probably would look something like this, and wood's about this price. So you come up with an estimate. And that's what happens when you get the expert in the room. But then when that thing is like, well, how much it costs to furnish a house? Well, then what happens is someone goes, well, I need chairs, I need tables, I'll need some wardrobes, I'll need some beds. And it's like, okay, well, there's a specialist in each area. And someone at the front end has got to standardize all this information in some way so they can present it. So they go, well, roughly, let's break this down into some standard categories. What's your bought out cost? What's it actually going to cost you materials? And then roughly how many hours, because we know how many hours we're going to employ people. And that's how you get the estimate. And the problem lies therein, because we then optimize to achieve that estimate, which is fundamentally wrong. Just because you use that to come up with your estimate, great. That isn't the best way to achieve your program. So then what goes on from there is we come into a design phase. And all the time, let's just go top level. So we have some requirements, we come up with some design, we then do some integration where we actually build the thing. Then we do some tests to make sure the thing that we've built actually matches up with the requirements that, what the customer actually wanted, assuming that it's still the same customer and people haven't got new jobs and moved on and all the rest of it, which is what happens. Once we've tested it, we then do some quality stuff at the end before we deliver it. And ultimately we do handoff, and depending on your project, there might be some support. And that whole cycle might last 10, 20, 30 years. You might do all that inside of a day, where you actually get with someone and build a thing. But you will do all of those stages. And in Agile, maybe you do that over a week, and maybe rather than handing off to the customer and doing these minor updates, you're delivering to an internal team and whatever else. And Spotify absolutely nailed this process, by the way. If anyone wants to look at Spotify's engineering process, awesome. They have release trains and all kinds of sexy stuff. But for me, therein lies the problem, is that we're trying to measure time. If it's you go to a single person who's a kitchen fitter, they just go, well, I will take all the risk on. I will take all the development on, because otherwise what happens is the customer says that they want something, and they leave no space for you to be innovative. They leave no space for opportunity to happen. And what the game becomes is about managing risk. Like, okay, they said they wanted it blue and green. Blue and green should never be seen, but that's what they said they wanted, so we're definitely just going to give them that, rather than someone going, hey, should we just paint it all blue? Like, there's a cost to that. And it ends up being a contract of risk and opportunity, not a contract of delivering the thing. And that's where it starts to go wrong, in my opinion. So right at that front end, when we do the pitch, lazy salespeople.
We're blaming salespeople here, but it could be any reason why you've decided to kind of go ahead like that.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, to be fair, a lazy salesperson will have this estimate in front of them, and they'll break it down. And when the customer then challenges their sales pitch, rather than having the awkward conversation there, which is, yeah, we hold some of the risk and we hold some of the opportunity. There's some money here for us to achieve that outcome for you. No, we're not going to go into detail because we're liable for the risk. They say to the customer, well, here it is. And the customer goes, well, what are you doing here? Line 4 says that you're going to resize my logo, and I'm not sure if I want that. And the customer doesn't know that's why they've come to you as the expert. And it's why partnerships can work really well and whatever else. But essentially, it becomes about managing risk and reward.
Okay, but to that point, right, is you sort of just brought up here something that especially those in consulting, service, all of that, come up against again and again and again, right? Which is for all the planning in the world up front, the agreement on the deliverables, there is always going to be something that happens in a project, in a delivery process, that will impact the amount of time that you need to spend on it, right? And there is risk there. If you are an expert, the risk is lower, right? Because you probably could deal with a problem that comes along a little bit quicker. But sometimes there are outliers. There are problems that no one can possibly predict, right? Or, a client needs to sign something off and they've disappeared. They broke their leg, God forbid, or something, and ended up in hospital for 2 weeks, right? Like there's always something there that can prolong the amount of time that's needed to be spent on something, whether you have that opportunity to deliver the thing or not. And it's, I think, understanding how you would deal with those type of problems in a bucket of categories potentially that can help alleviate any issues where, for all the planning in the world, everyone just does firefighting. Like when something like that comes along, and if you have like a playbook or an idea for how to deal with those type of issues or any type of issues, then you're not going to keep repeating the kind of same problem again and again. And I say this because I've worked on hundreds of projects in my career. I don't think any of them have just gone without hitch, Sam. And I don't think that's
Yeah.
because it's me and that's like the common denominator there. It's just life.
Yeah.
Life gets in the way. Like there's too many variables in life. Life is chaos, right? And you can put down on a piece of paper and say, right, we're going to get John to do this, Sam to do this, Vicky to do this, Karen to do this, or whatever. And then, they have a connection of hundreds of things in their life that could impact on that project. And for all the will in the world, something will come along to delay the deliverable of something. And then it becomes about time, especially if there is a deadline that needs to be met. Maybe a TV ad's going live. Maybe you've put out marketing that's going to have a financial impact if you move that deadline. And I see this a lot in the industry where people throw it all out the window, the time tracking tools, the beautiful documents, everything gets forgotten, the phone goes, and everyone reverts to email, basically CCing in 100 people. So that will always happen unless you've got some type of playbook or some type of kind of risk playbook in place first.
So for big projects like that, you end up with project plans which say, these are the lines of communication. This is how we're going to make decisions and blah, blah, blah. Like big complex projects get complex fast. When you get down to it, the value add, when you get down to the thing, it's usually 2 to 5% of the organization that actually deliver the widget, the complex bit of software, the thing. And this was the reason I went from working at FTSE 100 companies to working with smaller, more agile startups. Because in a FTSE 100 company, I observed, name and no names, organizations of 300 and odd people where you had one or two people who would ultimately end up writing the software, installing the software, and delivering it. Everybody else was attending design reviews and quality management processes and customer liaison sessions and going and doing safety reviews. And not to say that stuff doesn't have to happen, but it's not the value add bit. Whereas you go to other organizations where you're dealing with 8 or 10 people and the contract size not dissimilar, maybe 80% of the contract size. So, okay, 20% less, but you're dealing with like an organization that's 3 to 5% the size of the other one. And, it's 1 or 2 smart people in a room who aren't very good at contract negotiations, but they're intelligent people who listen to the requirements, make a few notes in their notepad. And then the next day, we're not waiting for requirements reviews, design reviews, contract proposals being signed off. They're being paid to turn up the next day. So they turn up the next day, sit down at their bench and start putting together bits of electronics, and they start building it. Agile is what you would say, is a formal control mechanism. So I think where we're getting to, large organizations, we're not going to solve how they operate and run.
No, well, they've got a vested interest, haven't they? Because they're looking to protect jobs. They're looking to protect very age-old
No,
processes.
I think large organizations, the way they make money is they make a percentage on every hour they can charge their customer, and their incentives are not aligned with being innovative and being cheaper. Their incentives are aligned with bidding as big a project as they possibly can and then selling as many hours off that contract as possible. And that it pisses me right off. Like, no, if right at the front end, and this is why, without being specific, in large government projects, we see zero innovation because there's no mileage in them doing something new and that benefits the end user. They're accountants at heart. Their CEOs and COOs are from the accounting and legal world, and what they're looking at doing is taking money off contract to return profit to the shareholders. And they will say, yeah, we want to be innovative and help our customer and blah, 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 because they need to say that, otherwise the customer wouldn't deal with them. But they're not. They're set up to spend money. They're set up to spend time. They're not set up to deliver effectiveness, to deliver a result.
Do you follow the secret CFO on Twitter
No, but I will.
at all? I don't know if that's your flavor. He tweeted and said last week, the best businesses I've worked with have felt like they're on the brink of disaster 99% of the time. And then goes on to talk about this war story where his first job in the industry took a reporting role in a large, mature public business. And part of the job was to produce a growth report, and assumed that they'd be picking up something that worked and that it was their job to not kind of break doing that growth report. And actually, like after a couple of hours of the handover, found that the critical financial KPI wasn't taken from accounting records, but a data extract was taken from an operations system, which at the time was 30 years old and no one knew how to use it. And then it went through a network of spreadsheets and macros that no one understood. And before spitting an answer out at the other end in an ugly workbook full of pop-up error messages and a ref error in the Excel document, seemed to have a mild panic attack about it, and ended up reporting it to his superior. And then they managed to like bring in a data forensics team and try and sort it out. But that sounds to me like there are a lot of processes, there's a lot of time being spent where people are protecting their jobs and protecting a legacy and protecting. So maybe it's like on both sides of the coin there, that there is like a kind of a need to charge as much as possible. But then when you charge as much as possible, the old Parkinson's law comes into play there, right? People, they'll feel the time to fit it. And then you can hire middle managers and people to look at how many cups of tea have been drunk in a month or whatever it is, and they'll want to protect their own job and not innovate and and have 30-year-old spreadsheets to do massive FTSE 100 reporting from.
Yeah, right. So I know we're going to talk about this, but employment is doomed. If you want secure jobs, like your days are numbered. Don't know how many days, but I fundamentally don't think that is going to work. Before getting into that, I want to just unpick everything we've just said. So we've got all animated about how big companies don't do it right, and it's all quite abstract, emotional.
We've really gone for them, haven't we?
Yeah, a little bit. But we've said this podcast is for people that are trying to scale from the £100,000 to seven figures to $1 million to beyond. Okay. So let's get down to it, like something you can implement from this. We've gone big abstract, massive processes, loads of confusion, not a lot of clarity. Let's get down to the fundamentals: time, cost, and quality. There's a nice simple triangle that everyone that's done any basic project management course will tell you. Like, if you want things done in less time, then you're going to have to pay more money to maintain the quality. Or if you reduce the quality, perhaps you can reduce the amount of time and the amount of money you spend. Or if you want to take more time, then maybe it will cost less and you can maintain the quality. So the idea of this time, cost, quality triangle is that the three sides of the triangle are related in some way.
But you can't have all three, ever. You can't have something cheap and fast and not expect amazing quality at the same time, right?
Yeah, okay, exactly. So where we get to is we get to talking about risks and opportunities. Let's explain what we mean by that. So if you have a person doing some tasks for a week, let's just make it really, really simple, like making a cup of tea, okay? There is a cycle time for making that cup of tea. You go through the process of, you walk into the kitchen, there's time there. So someone clocks on 9 o'clock in the morning, ding, I'm going to start the clock running. Walk into the kitchen, get distracted because Joe Bloggs has come into the kitchen as well. We ask each other, how was the weekend? We have a bit of a chat. How are the kids? What are you doing this evening? Blah, blah, blah. By about 9:15, maybe the kettle goes on. And then they kind of have to shuffle around each other because the kitchen's not very big. And maybe they then get the tea bags out and the sugar out and the cup out, by which time they realize, oh, the kettle's not plugged in. So let's plug the kettle in and turn it on again. And then we'll get the milk out. And we get to 9:30 and maybe we've got a cup of tea, and John brings his cup of tea into Julie, who's made it for, and Julie goes, oh, you've put 2 sugars in it. I didn't want any sugar. So we have a quality issue. So then we go back into the brew room. Now, when I say I've worked in facilities run by engineers where there is on the board next to the brew station a process for making a cup of tea in the most efficient way possible. And everybody that works in that facility has their order listed on the board. Super efficient, you think, okay? And ultimately, this is how these are engineers, like we're nerds, whatever. This is ultimately how you can reduce the amount of time, maintain quality, can't do anything about the cost, like the cost is the raw material and the time spent. Or can you? Can you get batch cups of tea? Can you get, and this is where you get down to, essentially what you are looking at is how much time does it take for a person to complete an operation? That's when it's a repeatable operation. What happens when it's something you've never done before? Like, I've heard of hard kombucha, but I don't know how it's made. If someone orders a hard kombucha off me, like I think there's probably tea in there in the ingredients. I think most drinks are like 98% water. There's probably water in it. Maybe it's hot or cold. Maybe there's a brewing time. Don't really know. So someone comes to me. I'm a tea making consultant. They go, I want a hard kombucha. And I go, okay. Don't know. There's a load of risk there. A week? Because I have no idea. Whereas if you're a hard kombucha manufacturer, maybe you can do that much faster. This is where we get to as an individual delivering a service. Now, a big organization, they just have this problem times 1,000. And ultimately, what you do when you're in charge of that big organization is start to measure risk and opportunity. Now, if I'm John and, well, no, let's say it's me, okay? And someone says to me, there's a job here paying, what's minimum wage now? £9-10 an hour. I'm going to pay you £10 an hour. It's £70 a day. If I'm working 7 hours a day, £10 an hour, £70 a day. And I want you to come and make cups of tea. I go, how many cups of tea? Well, we're looking for 14 cups of tea a day. I go, that's easy. That's a good deal.
2 cups an hour?
2 cups an hour.
I'd do that job.
Well, would you though? Would you trade? Or there's someone down the road going, I'll give you £10 a cup of tea. So it's double the money. I go, well, I can probably do that cup of tea in 15 minutes. I can probably do 4 an hour. So that's £40 an hour. So I could either work, 1/4 of the time, or I could make 4 times as much money. What we're talking about there is whether or not I have that appetite for risk. So just to be really clear, there's someone willing to pay me £10 an hour to make cups of tea. Really easy process. I know I can nail that on. There's someone over here going, I'll pay you 4 times as much, but if you're off sick, I'm not going to pay you. If you don't deliver the cups of tea, I'm not going to pay you. If they're not to order, I'm not going to pay you. If they're not on time, I'm not going to pay you. So what I'm looking at here is someone offering me £70, and if I'm off sick, they're still going to pay me £70. If it's not to spec, they're still going to pay me £70 because I have an employment contract with them. Versus this person over here is offering me 4 times as much money, but I have to take on the liability. I have to take on the risks. And by taking on the risk, I become more valuable at the marketplace, more valuable for delivering the thing.
Question quickly. So in your business, do you have a higher than average appetite for risk? Because in mine, I do. Like if a client comes to me and I haven't worked on Pinterest ads before or whatever, right? Give me a week. I'll be able to, because of my experience in social media and in software generally and in marketing, what you're paying me for is the likelihood that I could probably find the answer, right? So I do like taking on risk. Is that the same in your business?
I'm going to say it depends, because I make stuff for fighter jets and for weapon systems for military kit. And if I've never done it before, then I'm liable to say, well, I'll take a development contract to provide you a prototype first. And I would usually stage it. But if it's, for instance, someone today came to the team and said they want a tool building for Twitter, I've gone, yeah, okay, that's low risk, very low risk.
So that there's parameters, right, that you would work within, right?
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
That's kind of what our listening business owners might have to take into consideration then, is do the same thing really well every single day, right? And don't take on much risk. And the likelihood is that you're probably going to do your 10,000 hours or whatever you believe about that, right? And you'll become really, really good at the thing that you do, and you'll be able to deliver it again and again and again and make more time for yourself. So you deliver it in less time. But if you are in a business that perhaps needs R&D, you need to do research, you need to find other people to help you, you need to bring in freelancers or external experts or whatever, that is going to impact on the time that you spend in your business. And this is what would happen in our agency, right? And this is what could happen if you're going off and trying to deliver something that you've never delivered before.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the tea example, because I hope that it's really understandable. So that organization that is offering £10 an hour to make cups of tea, there must be at least one person who is also responsible for bidding the contract, for managing all the money, for managing all the staff. And they're not making cups of tea. They're spending all their time worrying about that stuff. And maybe they make 1 or 2 cups of tea, but that's kind of like a sideline. And they're still charging £10 a cuppa, but they're only paying you £10 for every 2 cups of tea. So there's some margin there. And also, because they're setting up this employment contract and they're taking the risk that you might be off sick, they're also going to keep a little bit of that money back because they've got these overheads and they have a cash flow problem and everything else. And it just becomes much, much more complex straight away, because their risks are multiplied by the number of people, by these extra employment contracts. Whereas over here, where you're taking £10 a cuppa, you're making £40 an hour. There's only you, and you can control and make those decisions. There's no reporting to be done. Like, okay, you've got to stop filing accounts, but you can outsource that. You can reduce the liability much more. Where it then becomes different is, like you say, if you increase complexity. So there's this organization who's still saying, I'll pay you £10 an hour, but now I want you to make this hard kombucha. And you're going, I don't know. And there's this same person over here that was offering you a tenner a cup of tea. They're going, I'll pay you £20 a cup of hard kombucha. And you're going, yeah, but I don't know how to make hard kombucha. That's the scenario that you just spoke about in your agency. Someone asked you to do something you don't know. And this is where you have to start out as a business owner, is like, look at your worst case scenario. Your worst case scenario is that you can still sell the cups of tea. And in the meantime, it might cost you a day, of lost revenue and time to figure out everything you need to know about making hard kombucha. But the reward is there. And so your value at the marketplace is a function of the amount of risk you're willing to take. And it's a function of the amount of time it takes and then the quality. And the reason that I think these large organizations are knackered is because they're not run on that value add bit. They're not run by when we deliver one of these, this is what we get in. They're run by all this bureaucracy of, well, how much time is everyone spending? And are we making sure that we're managing all of these risks correctly? And does this, and okay, big complex projects, you could argue, and I wouldn't agree with you, but you could argue that's the only way you pull it off. But they have all of this complexity. We all know people who are useless in organizations, and organizations, because of HR laws and everything else, have to protect them. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do. I'm saying that that's a suboptimal system for delivering the outcome. And if we're talking about time for money and we're talking about business, that business model is an inferior business model to mine over here, where I have people, individuals who go, no, well, I am willing to work hard and I'm not going to, as best I can, be off sick, and I am going to deliver on time, and fundamentally it can't happen. And we're seeing this now evolve as software as a service and these network effects take place. Uber, okay, that business model is dominated. And that was like the first one that started. They're not great. Deliveroo, Just Eat, WeWork, Fiverr, Upwork.
That's the gig economy ones you're talking about. But like, I hear all these stories coming out of Google and Facebook about how bureaucratic they are internally now, because ultimately that's what happens in super big business. You've got people being managers managing managers, right? And maybe that is just the natural life cycle of where a company goes when it gets that big, right?
Well, yeah, I think at the moment, so I want to be actionable and not too like hypothetical. So at the moment, yeah, I think once you get over a certain size, we've seen that happen. And we're talking about going from 100 grand to 7 million quid. So we should bring that back into focus. But I don't think that this is how it will always be. I think we're seeing the likes of Bology talk about network state, network effects. where essentially you can subscribe to those big, let's call them initiatives like Google and Facebook, and you maintain this interface that's very efficient, which is time for an outcome. And that's ultimately what's going on there. And I really think that's what we're seeing more and more of, because essentially now we are all plugged in to the same network, or most people are, that are working on this type of work. So, only it's a category of work. We're all plugged in by the same, computer, mouse, video, sound. Like, we're all plugged in. And some people are plugged into an efficient system and some people are plugged into an inefficient system. And that's essentially what we're looking at. And I think what we are saying, what we are recognizing, where we are betting our lives on, is that, well, we want to be part of this efficient system. That's why we own agencies. It's why we own consultancies. It's why we operate in the way we do. And we're building tools and infrastructure. And we can see the future because that's the place that we live. We're seeing those older companies now get challenged, and you can see it in every domain. Everyone says, well, okay, yeah, but that's only content creation and NFTs. And what's an NFT? Okay, yeah, fair point. There's going to be a lot of people trying to make hard kombucha and not knowing how along the way. But 3D printing's advancing. We're seeing the distribution of power get sorted out as we have the power crisis. There's a lot of development in this world, and I'm not saying it's the right decision right now at this moment, but it's where the puck's going, and I bet my life on it.
Yeah, I mean, things change, like 100% change. Old agencies, just coming back to what, the stomping ground that I know, all grew up to be massive, big network behemoths, like Omnicon or WPP or whatever, right? And then what happened was, people left those companies and started mini agencies and were able to deliver quicker, have direct conversations with someone senior and actually like get results with those clients. And then what happened was the big network agencies bought them up, and that, I imagine, what will happen is another cycle will happen there. Now that remote working is pretty much considered a norm, there's going to be like a better business that's going to kind of deal with that, and maybe that might be offshots of ex-agency employees coming together or whatever. But it's the same with big software companies. You think like massive software companies from back in the day. Dell's not like a great example because I know they were pretty innovative at the time, right? But like I can think of a big 90s software company, Dell and Microsoft, and what came, and Sun Systems, and what came out of those were the startups in Silicon Valley. Again, they've now earned all their money. They are now investing in bigger and bigger software companies, not necessarily delivering for their users anymore. And what will come out of that is the next phase, Web3, right? To your point.
It's that cycle, isn't it? You start in a place where it's a couple of people willing to take all the risk because they think they have an insight. And then that risk gets mitigated. And it's like, there's loads of money coming in and this is actually really repeatable now. And then everyone with the money goes, I'm going to put my money over there because I can get a multiplier on it. And I know I can get it consistently, and then it goes to the stock market, and then you end up with a board and voters and everything else. And then when there's some smart ass going, I think we should like send rocket ships to another planet, everyone's going, that sounds really risky. You're not doing that with my money. And so it can't happen because that's how it's set up. I feel like we need to like bring the fire here and nail down what we think people should do in your business.
Okay, well, here's my vibe, right? Coming at it from a kind of a more like a smaller business focus, right? Is ironically is making time, right, without any distractions, to sit down and look at the things that you have been doing in your business all week, and genuinely have some self-awareness about whether the thing that you were doing this week has contributed to the outcome of making money for you, right? And dealing with the excuses that you're giving yourself, like, it's strategic why I'm doing this. Well, what's the strategy? Like, we want to know that, right? But asking yourself, why are you doing those things? Like, things I see happening a lot with small business owners, solo business owners and startups is they're all doing reels and TikToks right now. That is great, guys. But why are you doing them? Is that having a direct effect on your bottom line, on sales? Why haven't you outsourced that as the business owner, right? Someone was talking on a call the other day, a coaching call that was doing about needing to know all of the tax info of what they can claim back on. Why do you need to know that? Just give your stuff to an accountant and let them do with it. It's their job, right? I was sort of baffled by that. Other procrastination station type activities that aren't about how you earn the money. And be really honest, brutally honest with yourself about those things, because then when you can see what you have and have not been spending your time on, it should give you some self-awareness about what you need to do next. And that's really important, because it really, you're either doing the thing or you're delegating the thing in your business. As Mike Michalowicz says in his book Clockwork, right? You don't need to be doing anything else. You're either doing the doing or the delegating. And you have to have a small sliver of time to be thinking about the business, obviously. Then you need to ask yourself, out of those doing tasks, what are you actually doing? And is it directly related to the outcome of making you cash? So if you're not invoicing, if you're not making the thing to sell, if you're not at the market selling the thing, this is all a problem. If you're sat at home in front of your desk researching the next time tracking tool, that's probably not going to help you here. Yeah, just to put it mildly.
I think I want to signpost people to the podcast we recorded last, where I spoke about this business system framework where you have customer development, customer delivery, customer support, and then business administration. In those 4 major blocks of your business, there are reoccurring tasks that happen over and over again. And if they are not scheduled in your calendar in the correct proportions, and you don't know the numbers around them, then, if your calendar does not reflect the activity that needs to happen in those 4 major blocks of your business, that's the place to start. So to get hyper specific, we'll talk about the lifeblood of any business, which is business generation, customer development. If you do not know how many people, how many conversations you need to have, and with what people, and you don't know how many of those conversations then result in a sale or multiple sales, however those conversations happen, online, offline, social, ads, whatever else. If you can't measure those, if you can't measure that leading mechanism, like a conversation typically takes half an hour, I need to have 10 a week, therefore I need to block out 5 hours a week in my calendar to have these conversations to result in one sale, the lagging measure. If you can't correlate that, then you're screwed. And the same with, if you don't know how long it takes you to sell one widget, whether that's one service time and whatever else, if you don't know how to get that outcome, or how much time you need to attribute to that outcome, if it's a creative task, then again, you're screwed.
You're not screwed, right? You're just running a hobby business, right? Just to be clear. So if you want to run a hobby business, good for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there are people that get by doing that, and some people do really well. The other thing I want to pick out, you said, if you're researching the latest time tracking tool or whatever else, yeah, definitely. What I would say is I have time in my calendar every single week to optimize my business. And that's literally to look at where I'm spending time and how I can more efficiently do it. That should be an activity. That should be a structured thing that you do if you're looking to grow. So I want to kind of segue into how you can optimize your business. So chances are, if you've started a business, you are entrepreneurial, you're creative, and you're probably not an operator. You're probably able to work really hard, but managing time, managing tasks, delivering to your customer, less exciting to you. You're probably more interested, I would wager, in the big vision, in the big idea, and selling it and creating it and growing it and, bringing it up like a child. You're probably less excited by operations, I would guess. And I'd be interested to know, who's listening to our podcast. Have we got mostly entrepreneurial types, or have we got people that are interested in the bits and bytes and time tracking? So I want to get back to why I think having a job is going to die. I think employment will certainly decrease for a whole host of reasons, which we can get into one day. But someone I've seen do the operations really well, and I've discussed this concept with, is someone called Dea, and I always get Dea's surname wrong, but you want to have a look at Digital Business Manager Bootcamp. That's her course, where I'm going to give it a plug, where she trains up these virtual operators to work in your business and does a really great job. And I was discussing with Dea, who's, by the way, got a consulting background. I forget all of her accreditations, quite an impressive person. But I was discussing with her, this risk problem you have, where you start out as a freelancer, as a consultant, where you're taking on all this risk. You've decided that it's worth going and earning your £10 a cup rather than £10 an hour. because you're in control of how many cups and all the rest of it. The problem you have, and this is the problem my wife had when I stepped out on my own, she's going, but what about your pension? And what if you are off sick? And what about if that contract disappears? And what about if this customer lets you down? And what about financial stability? Like, they're all genuine problems. And so at the moment, I think the bootstrappy way that we all deal with it as entrepreneurs, I would wager not very well, is, well, when we get paid our £10,000 or our 20,000, however much money comes in, we go, well, there's a bit for the VAT, there's a bit for tax there's a bit for corporation tax, there's profit first principle, where maybe you say, oh, this, I'm going to take 20% of all money that comes in, and that's for me, and then I have some business expenses. And in theory, we chunk up all the money. What I think is missing in the marketplace is some sort of payment portal for freelancers, agencies, and consultants that automatically deals with money coming into the business, that automatically apportions a little bit to a sick bucket. Like, let's put that money to one side because people have mental issues, people have physical issues, family dies, and all the rest of it. And there is a VAT problem, a VAT liability, there's a corporation tax liability, and of course you've got to pay yourself something. And I think fundamentally that's what we're talking about, is the management of the money that comes in against the time, cost, and quality, and the risk and opportunity.
Well, yeah, I just bring it back to like how can people like listening to this take action? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think if you have to make the decision that you can take the risk to go out on your own, assuming that you're not already. Once you're out on your own, once you've taken on the risk of finding clients and whatever else, you need to have all the activities, as we previously mentioned, lined up in your calendar. Then the financial management of it, if you're not at the stage where you can have a fractional CFO or a CFO, a chief financial officer, or someone managing the money for the company, there's just some really basic rules that should be in place. You need to, as money comes in, put it aside for your VAT liability. You need to put money aside for your corporation tax liability. And you need to have a war chest. You need to have all money set aside for, we want to grow the business. I think that is really essential. Like, don't treat it like a hobby. Treat it as if, going back to what we said way at the start, like, if you were running this business for someone else, how would you run it? Don't run it for yourself. Run it as if you were having to present it to someone else. If it was someone else's money, how would you manage it? I think is where I go with that.
Basic facts, really, that like if you want to run a business, especially if you're working on your own, you're a solopreneur or the beginnings of a startup with just a few employees, you've got to be a grown up, right? You got to look at your time and use it efficiently. You can't be trading your time for lower quality tasks and outcomes in your business, and you have to think that way every single day, and you have to discipline yourself to be able to do that as well, because that's how you run a business. That's how you move a business along, because otherwise we'd just atrophy, essentially, right?
You've got to learn to manage yourself. Like, if you're going to work for yourself, you've got to learn to manage yourself. I say that from experience. I spent all of my savings, 6 figures of savings I had in my early mid-20s, plus money I took out to employ a team, to set up an office. I played business for a year. And during that time, I spoke to no customers. We built some amazing software. And I say all this, I say it was amazing. I ended up in hospital with stress and whatever else. We spent all that money and more. We had major issues within the team and everything else. Like that, I didn't know how to manage myself. I didn't know what these outcomes were. Like, there's a lot to be said for learning these lessons by getting smashed in the face a few times. Like, but hopefully we can save people a bit of pain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've burnt out, like officially burnt out, like had to go to therapy, burnt out once in my career. And it was like the movies, I was like literally like that, like the first time, just like, oh, just really stressed, like proper panic attacks and everything, just from doing like 70, 80-hour, 90-hour weeks just to get like stuff delivered.
I'll just work harder.
Yeah. I just work harder. And then like what happens is the quality and the output just diminishes massively. There you go. So that was my first foray into why being a people pleaser isn't always a good thing. Stop saying yes to everything. That aside, it's having, I know Gary Vee talks about this quite a lot, it's having a genuine self-awareness about where you're at in your business, and that those few minutes or maybe a bit longer you were talking about sitting down and actually looking at your business and trying to optimize it. What if you are the person who is stopping your business from being optimized, right? Because of what you're bringing to the table. People pleasing, issues with getting on the phone with customers, like a whole host of things, right? You're the problem. And asking yourself without shame or embarrassment, how do you overcome that problem? And it could be as simple as saying no to the things that you're saying yes to. It could be, I've gone through it myself, like, letting go of clients recently that I didn't want to work with anymore. It could be hiring people or outsourcing something that you're not good at. Like when I hear small businesses in my membership telling me they do their own tax returns, it just makes me cringe inside. I'm like, that's what an accountant's for. Massive waste of time.
Yeah. It's bad ROI on your time, that. What's an
100%.
accountant? $1,000 a year, couple grand a year if it's a bigger business, maybe 5 to 10 grand a year.
And they
But
know
sure as hell, you are
everything.
not a specialist. Yeah.
No, they know all the loopholes. They know how to submit tax returns. They eat it for
You
breakfast.
say loopholes, you mean
Well, in
legal
legal,
ways
legal,
to plan tax.
legal. Yeah. Well, like, my accountant last year was like, oh, well, did you know if you claimed on this thing, then you get a break here? And it's like, oh, or, go ahead and claim for some R&D in your business. Like these are things that we just don't know, but like they're in the trenches and they know about. But I think getting over yourself and being able to ask those tough questions is really important.
I think you've got three options. If you're sat there going, oh, I'm not really sure whether I'm up to this or not, okay, decide whether you are going to step up or go get a job. Like, I think that's a really important, and no shame either. Like, decide whether you want to take the risk, decide whether you want the late nights, decide whether you want the occasional chest pain if you're really unhealthy. Like, decide, like, make a decision, because, like, no shame. There's some really comfortable jobs out there. You'll get the money, you'll be home at 5 every night. Like, it's low stress, you can be off sick and everything. Like, that, it's okay to want that. Like, no shame there at all. But once you have made the decision, commit to it. And assuming you commit to having the business and growing it, I think if you are getting in your own way, you have two options. One is block out the time to do the thing that you're stopping yourself doing, and do it. Just do it. And that's where these people that have better willpower, that are self-motivated and whatever else, are great. And you might choose to, give yourself a crutch, get some accountability in there, like do, like we were talking beginning, group working, or get on Zoom with another business owner or whatever else. Like, that might be a crutch, but plow through it and you probably learn it. And, it's like going and doing your least favorite exercise in the gym. Like, do it enough times, it'll become your favorite.
No business is that easy, is it? Like, you don't just get to do the bare minimum.
I'm not an advocate of abdicating responsibility. If you're going to delegate responsibility, you have to have done the thing a couple of times, or at least know enough about it. The third option, I think, is, like you say, you can delegate and outsource, and it might be, for the first one, you want to sit with the person and watch them do the process. I mean, literally on Zoom screen share, show me how you do the thing, okay, and I'll pay you to do the thing. But you might not be able to take on that liability. You might not be able to afford the person to do the thing. So just on that third one, like, to give something really tactical, practical, there is arbitrage to be had. That's basically, you can pay someone in another country that is happy to earn less per hour for doing the task, rather than pay someone in your own country. The only way you can do that, though, is if you understand the task in the first place, if you can train them up and manage them to do it. So you see this a lot. People are going, oh, I got someone on Fiverr to design me a website, and, I paid them £100 and it came out garbage. It's like, well, can you do it? Do you understand enough to give them a decent brief?
Did you brief them correctly?
Exactly. So there's a lot to be said for at least once or twice. Just go through the pain, like, be a grown up, step up, do the uncomfortable thing. And if you're not willing to that, go back to step one. Like, maybe consider getting a job.
I really like Brian Tracy's book, Eat the Frog. I don't know if you've ever read it.
Eat That Frog. Yeah.
I think it's a really good direct way about learning how to overcome procrastination in business and just get started. I think we've just talked about throughout this entire episode, it's different flavors for different personality types, whether you have to find accountability or you have to trick yourself or even guilt yourself. I don't know, like if you're a masochist, right? Or get real with yourself. Yeah, do what needs to be done, whatever works. And finding people who can help you get there definitely is really important. I would say, like, that's my personal struggle, is delegating to people I can trust and find. And I have to get out my own way with that, and I have to keep always hiring. I'm always chatting with, potential freelancers that I can bring on board. And it's just a time suck, but I know that it's a time investment for later on.
It's a process.
Yeah, exactly.
It's well said, isn't it? Once you get to a certain size, your job becomes about recruitment. It becomes about finding the best people. And I would argue, once you've nailed down demand for a thing and to get yourself over that £100,000 mark, the next stages of growth, unless it's software, but even if it's software, the next stage is to find other people to bring into your organization, which is why we both talk a lot about optimizing, outsourcing, SOPs, and all those, or at least this is my bag, like systems.
I feel like that's what we should talk about in another episode then, is definitely how to optimize people, bring in teams.
Other people.
Yeah, other people. I think we've done a pretty good job, I think, of doing some ass kicking in this episode, if anyone's listening to this.
Yeah, I don't know. So if you've been listening to this, let us know in the comments. Tell us if you enjoyed it, didn't enjoy it. Let's have some feedback. I really enjoyed it. It was at least cathartic. Whether other people did or not remains to be seen.
I think it's an imperfect process, right? Self-improvement with time in business is ongoing, and you don't just nail it and go, right, I'm done now. Woohoo! As we've discussed, right? The bigger you get, the more problems that you find, or the more you diversify, the more problems you find, or the more risk that you take on, the more problems that you find. So running a business is transient, and you just have to find ways to be able to take on new things happening every day in your business. Otherwise, you could just go and set up a factory, make the same thing every day, have a minimum element of risk in there, and great, if that's for you, super. But even then, there's going to be risk, right?
Yeah. You have the upfront risk, don't you? Like, to set up a repetitive process, whether that is a factory banging out widgets or whether that is a digital business selling digital products, there is the upfront capital cost of getting started, which is why selling services, doing a service for someone that has very low startup costs, and essentially you're selling your time, it's a function of your time, the outcome is a function of your time, is a great place to start. But the graduation of that is to start selling units of things that are on the shelf, productized services, digital products, or even physical products, for sure.